Hey everyone, you're watching Conversations in Pop Culture. I am your host, Andrew Davis, and this episode is brought to you by my sponsors, BCW Supplies. Use code POPANIMECOMICS to get 10% off your entire order. They do bags and boards, long boxes, card supplies, comic supplies, anything you need, they got you covered to protect your valuables, whether you're a comic collector, a card collector, or any type of ephemeral collector, paper collector, whatever you may be, coins, they got you covered there too. So obviously 10% off is a big deal. Use them. I get a commission off of it. You get a discount. Everybody's happy. They get business and your valuables are protected. Also, I do have a very cool t-shirt that is up, and I do want to sell a bunch of these shirts. When I sell 20 of these shirts, I will be adding a new design, and it is of Amuro Ray. It is making fun of Taco Bell, the most interesting man in the world, Gundam, Fallout, and a few other things. So obviously buy my shirt. It's available in 16 different colors and in a mini skirt, which I absolutely approve. So please go and buy my shirt. 16 colors and a mini skirt, guys. You know, I just can't wait for somebody to wear it on a mini skirt. It's going to be fantastic. So obviously I'm not going to bore you with the rest of my sponsors here, as I have with me comic creator, writer, and artist Melvin Cartagena, I want to say. I probably
Melvin Cartagena.
So feel free to correct me with your last name, and welcome to the show.
So it's Melvin Cartagena, but it's okay. The truth is, everybody struggles with that name. I always reference Cartagena, Colombia, you know, the city in Colombia. Or Cartagena, Spain, you know, so those two, like, maybe they give you an idea, but no worries. So good night, Andrew. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me over.
Yeah, no, I am very, very happy to have you on. You supported my show. You've been on my comic book hangout, and obviously we share mutual interests to some degree that we're not going to talk about, because you have a very interesting comic that I want to talk about instead, called The Plot. And so before we really get into it, there's a bunch of stuff I want to talk about it with it. What is the basic premise of the book for those hearing about it for the first time?
Okay, so the basic premise of the plot is that a particular individual, a very unremarkable individual, has an incident. He's in a park. He's a sketch artist. He likes to make comics, so he's sketching. He has an incident that ends in a casualty. Someone is dead. From there, he goes to an interrogation room, and the people interrogating him act like police, but they don't have uniforms. They seem more like Men in Black. And their interest seems to be not at all in what happened and what ends in the casualty of, you know, a person dying, but in rather what he was doing there, why he was at that particular bench, and a number of other things that have him on ease. And from there, well, something happens that I don't want to say. I don't want to spoil it. But let's just say I'm drawing from, how would I say this? I'm drawing from cliches in espionage and in conspiracy theory. So I'm drawing from.
Let me throw a code out there. I like speaking in code. Does Denzel Washington ring a bell for you?
I'm sorry, say that name again.
Does Denzel Washington ring a bell?
Oh, well, yeah, well, it does, but it's interesting too, because
does Frank Sinatra ring a bell?
Okay, then now you're getting closer to the source, because I'm referencing the original, not the remake, actually. So I'm referencing that.
See, we're speaking in code here.
Yes. You have to read the plot to find out what we're talking about. Yes, which I think you will include the cut. You will include the link somewhere. It's in a Gumroad available as a free download. And that I'm just introducing
to people. Up above everybody. It's all good. If you want to read it, you want to check out the book, we're going to talk about it. So
yes, because we're going to talk in circular fashion.
I want to dive into a little bit because, and I'm going to avoid certain things. Obviously, we have a very mundane character named Corman. And Corman is sort of writing a comic about an incident that occurred and a sleeper agent, and he's being interrogated to some degree by these weird men. And obviously, it's a very interesting book. And so where did this idea even come from, and even building out this book? Because it's very much a bare bones comic, but it's not bare bones in the concept of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's not broad, but it's deep, I guess. It's sort of deep. It goes deep into some ideas that I've always been fascinated about. Like, I have a fascination with secret agents, with espionage. I have from not so much now, but Cold War espionage. I found that those stories fascinating, like the Eye of the Needle, all these things. I've always loved that, the whole idea of like someone who is pretending to be someone else, and they have become so good at it that they become the other person. They kind of forget who they actually are. So that's one trope that I'm very fascinated with, that I explore a little bit here. I explore one trope that is more associated with UFOs. I explore another trope, or maybe a cliche, I'm not sure, but the concept of the sleeper agent, this person that was trained to do something, but they don't know it. They're just in another country. They're living their life for years, but then they get a phone call one day, and a password is said, and all of a sudden it clicks in, like, oh, I am now assassin mode, that kind of thing. So, and I think that's been debunked, but I still find that very fascinating. I love that. Like anything involving, I guess, paranoia and the mind and the pliability of the mind, I find that stuff fascinating. So I kind of mix all these things into a thriller that I'm going to say it's very standard towards the end, but the build up to that is a little bit unconventional because it consists of an interrogation that is very long. I'm sorry, say that again.
So let's kind of talk about it and let's set the stage a little bit, because what's really interesting about your book is that we have a very mundane character and we have an interrogation that's taking place, and then we have things that are referenced. And so what was this like really building out Corman? Because Corman, who's being interrogated in this room, we don't know why he's being interrogated. It's very confusing why he's being interrogated in this story. And obviously, we find out that he's former military. He's out on disability. He has a part-time job. And what was this like really creating him? Because he's just sort of the everyday average man. And what
Yeah.
was really building him out? Because he does have military training, but obviously he's a disabled veteran at this point. And so what was this like? Because that's what's fascinating really about this story, is that we have an everyday average guy.
Yeah, he is average also, and I guess I like the idea of like putting an angle in the military. Like he has his military background, which comes in. It's convenient, you could say. It's convenient for something that happens later on in the book, so it gets in that advantage. But also, I'm not saying it, but I'm hinting something happened while he was in service, where he, as he states at one point during the interrogation, he gets blackouts that he cannot account for, and one of the interrogators even addresses that, like how he has these blackouts and he loses chunks of time, which I understand that's a thing that actually happens to people. So once again, it starts going more into the paranormal, into the UFO paranormal stuff. But like whenever, if you ever watch like the UFO abduction stories, one common thing that comes up over and over is how they lose track of time. It seems like only a little bit of time passed, but it turns out they've been gone for hours. Or in some cases, they've been gone for days. It turns out they were declared missing. The police was looking for them. Their family was looking for them. So I like that aspect. And again, it's both something that is exciting and it's terrifying. Like if that were happening to me, I'd be terrified. Like what happens during this time? Like how does this happen? How do you make that stop? Can you stop it at all? Can you make that, stop that, losing chunks of your time like that? So to me, that's both exciting and terrifying. So I wanted to explore that a little bit, the idea of just losing yourself, losing your consciousness to the point that you don't remember where you were for X amount of time. I find that just so scary and so exciting. So I was like, well, let me look at it from a layman's point of view, because I didn't really research that. Again, I'm using more pop culture and what I call psychocultural debris. This stuff that is just forever circulating in pop culture but doesn't go away, like aliens, like certain conspiracy theories, like trends come and go, but these things, they've been with us forever, it seems, and they're still with us. And if anything, we live in a time where they're even more with us now, like conspiracy, where people are reading conspiracy into everything. We seem to be more and more into that now. So I'm going from that. I didn't do research as so much as just pick from the air, pick from here and there, all these little things that are in the air that are circulating right now. I just kind of glutted them together into this thriller.
Yeah, and even to go further into this, because obviously, one of the things that is sort of happening in comics right now is that a lot of people are doing sci-fi and then they're trying to get an explanation for everything. And I think that's one of the things that I like about your book. And obviously, I read it. You can pick it up and read it. It's available for people who want to read it. And we're going to get into sort of the pricing of that in a second, or not a second, in about 10 to 15 minutes here. But what was that like, that saying, look, we're not focusing on necessarily the hard science of this, but we're focusing on more the social aspect of it. and the integration and the interrogation. And okay, you have this problem, but this person wound up dead, because I think that's something that people get really messed up in stories right now, is that what story are we telling? Are we telling the story about why you have a blackout? Or are we telling a story about, hey, why were you in the park? And obviously your book is sort of telling the story of why was this guy in the park and how did this person end up dead in the park? You know what I mean? And I think that's something that is very important. And I think it gets messed up in comics right now. And so what was that like? Because I think you really hit sort of that story on the head.
Okay, so a couple of things. I guess my favorite science fiction tends to be the one that's more focused on what you mentioned, the social aspects. I'm not really interested in elaborate world building, like when you think of, say, someone like Larry Niven, who built this series of book called Ring World, where he imagines this world that is a ring around a sun. And it's something so vast that it takes like a long time to go all the way around it. And because of the distance, you have cultures isolated from each other. Like, I find that impressive, but it feels more like a technical exercise than telling a story. So while I like stories that are driven by ideas, I favor more the human aspect more than the technical aspect. So as a science fiction book, I'm actually using discarded technology, like old technology, like it's built around old tech because of a little bit of nostalgia factor. Like, I miss certain things. Like, I miss kind of when the internet was 56K modem, and if somebody called, you lost your connection, that kind of thing. I actually kind of miss that a little bit compared to like what we have now, which is awesome too, because you and me, we can talk like this now. Distance and time are sort of irrelevant in the time that we live. But at the same time, it's a little bit too much. It's a little bit overwhelming. So maybe in some ways, telling a story like this is a way to slow down time a little bit, or bring back time to when it wasn't so intense. There wasn't so much information flying between our ears and in the air between us and everything. So there's that aspect. And let me see, what was the other one? Well, there's a mythology. Like, I'm a sucker for mythology. I love mythology because mythology infuses a fictional place with a sense of a past. It has a history, and that makes it more authentic than getting down the details of the gravities, how specific the gravity is, and where why they have to wear particular outfits the closer they are to any part of the sun than to the other part of the sun. Like, things like that don't particularly.
One of the things about this book that I like is that this is a very story driven position. I don't really care why Corman has blackouts. I care more about why he's being interrogated. Did he kill the person in the park? Did the person in the park just die? What exactly happened? What's going on with Corman? What's going on with these interrogators? And what the hell's going on here? That's the story I want to know, right? And that's something that I think is very important because, as I was stating, a lot of times in comics, I feel like somebody's trying to tell fantasy and they're trying to answer every question. And there has to get to a point of saying, look, do we question why Superman can fly, right? We never ever in Superman have ever questioned why Superman can fly or why he shoots lasers out of his eyes. And I think with comics, and especially in indie right now, you need to, and all these writers are saying, my character shoots lasers out of his eyes because he was exposed to a weird thing and that happened. And it's like, you don't need that information. I don't need the information of why Corman has blackouts in this book. I really don't need it. I need the answer of why is he in his situation. I think that's something that, is a very good skill of understanding, saying, hey, I get this is why it's going on. And then the other thing that you hit really well is this book's divided into three in a lot of ways. And the first part is really that interrogation where these guys in these suits are really interrogating him hard and they're trying to break him. And that's the other thing too, where it feels like an interrogation, and there's a sense of realism there. And I think that's an art in of itself, and for a lot of reasons. So what was that like, really getting that interrogation thing down? And then
Okay,
also
so
his answer is really interesting too, because he tells his answer and it's almost a story within a story is his answer to some degree. And answer it as however you want, because part of it ruins it, part of it doesn't.
okay,
And we're
so
not talking about part three. We're not talking about part three, guys, because the
Okay.
ending is not what you expect.
Yeah, the interrogation comes from just my own experience. Like, if you ever been like stopped by police and interrogated, they just ask you the same things over and over. Like, they just keep going on the same thing over and over. And something that you answer, no matter how casual, how innocent, how throwaway it is, they turn it over like it's something that needs to be studied deeply, and it just goes on like that. Like it, and then they just start over with something that they asked you 10 minutes ago, and it just goes on like that. Like any little thing, like they just immediately turn it over. Like if you ever, I don't know if you've ever been unfortunate enough to be in that situation. That's how it is. Like I more or less got that down. Like that's how it is. They just keep going and keep going. Like there's nothing there, but let me just do it one more time, just maybe because I'm bored at this point, because I have nothing else to do all day. Let me just shake this person down somewhere. And they just keep going. So that's where it comes from, how they ask him the same things over and over. Then they'll ask him again, but in a different way. At one point, one of the interrogators, he puts a question, something that I agree with, when they say, through simple repetition, you realize you know more than you think you do, which is true. Like when you're like walking down a street or something, like a busy street, immediately you don't capture a lot of detail, but like later on, if you're relaxing, you do realize you actually picked up a lot of detail, or rather your subconscious, like indirectly, you picked up a lot of detail. It's just consciously you're looking for a store, or you're looking to meet a friend, or that's what's on the front of your mind. But as you're going through that, you're picking up a lot of information. It's just that you're not registering it consciously. So I like that aspect of it, how it is true that we actually do capture more than we think we do, and we see and hear more than we think we do. So that's one aspect that I wanted to explore in the interrogation. What you mentioned earlier about about Corman not needing to know what the blackout is and all that, that is the influence of one of my favorite writers, Philip K. Dick. Was really good about that. Like the totality of his work was questioning reality. You know, his characters were always trying to pierce the apparent reality to something that they felt was beyond what they were seeing and hearing. So they were always trying to go beyond what they were seeing and hearing. But one thing that I loved about Philip K. Dick is also the same thing. Like he had mythology. He usually had corporations that were going a century back, and he would make a casual reference to someone who was already dead by the time the story has taken place. But what that person did a long time ago is having repercussions in the present, in the story's present. And so I love that. I love the mythology aspect, and I also love the fact that he always left little things unfit. Like you said, he didn't answer everything. He would mention something, casually make a reference to something, and then he wouldn't move on to something else. He wouldn't answer that thing. Like you said, like he didn't feel the need to explain everything. He would just leave it there. He would just introduce something and just leave forget about it.
Yeah. There's a concept in stories where, look, I don't need to know everything, and also sometimes you just want the little detail, but you don't want that detail explored because that detail gives context. It's kind of like in pinball where you have a bunch of bumpers. You don't have to hit every single bumper, but it's sometimes nice to have a bumper in play. And it's also just there. I mean, obviously we both read comics. How many times have you looked at a comic book and on, the cover of the book or in a panel, there's certain details that have nothing to do with the story, but they lead into something. But for instance, if it's like a neo-noir story, you might have the bar's name on the corner and the character's just walking by, but it sort of sets the mood. But that character has never ever been in that bar, but they're like a detective on the beat and they're passing, a nudie joint, for lack of a better word, is a good example too, as well. But it just sets the tone a little bit. But there's nothing that's ever referenced about that ever again.
Exactly, yeah, and I love that. I love when people do that. They just sort of put something there and maybe momentarily address it, but then they just move on to something else. So Philip K. Dick did that. And now that you mentioned that, one comic book artist that I'm a huge fan of, and I think he's influenced me, is Matt Kine. He does a very similar thing. A few years ago, I read a comic by him called Revolver about a character who he lives this very dull, like you and me, we're just very dull guys who don't do much interesting stuff. But at a specific,
I just don't talk about it.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm a very boring guy. Yes, I live in my head most of the time.
We work together, right?
We do, yes. Yeah, but we don't talk about it publicly. Yes, yeah.
That's a joke. That's a joke. If somebody goes missing in the night, I'm just saying.
Oh boy, man. It was the Men in Black that did it. The interrogating the person now. But okay, so in that comic, I think it's a 1020 or 1022. He's transported to an alternate version of the same world where there's like a famine, there's like a war that's been going on for years. There's all this stuff happening. But again, it's never explained what exact, or maybe they did, I cannot remember, but I like the fact that it's just a simple trick. It's just at 1022, something happens and he's transported to this other place. Now, throughout the comic, while he's struggling to figure out what is happening, there is this bulletin board on the bottom, all across all the pages of the comic, that talks about there is a famine in this place, there is war. And then it reaches like a sort of end of the page. And when you flip the page, it's a completely different set of news. Like he never repeats the same thing twice, but it just runs through the entire story. And it's such a clever thing to let you know the state of the world without having to actually go to another part of the world. Through that little, like Reuters, you know how Reuters has that thing that scrolling thing? Well, Matt Kine has something like that in that comic book. And I thought that is such a clever device. That is such a clever way to inform you about this world without having to, stop the story to give you details about something happening in Africa or in South America or in Canada. So stuff like that, I'm a fan of. And from my own limited skills, I try to do that with the plot as well, in that I'm trying to inform you a little bit about the world, but not enough, because at the same time, I'm giving you information in bits and pieces through the interrogation. You're finding out more. Like you're thrown in the middle of things and you're disoriented. You don't know what's happening, except that this guy seems to be kind of cornered by these four guys. And gradually you start getting a sense of like relentlessness, like the pacing is relentless, the interrogation is relentless. But little by little, you're learning a little more. You're picking up a little more information. Because I'm a fan of that also. I'm a fan of movies that feed you information piecemeal, but you have to work. You're like a participant when you're watching the movie or reading the mystery or reading the comic. Like you're participating, you're like engaged, as opposed to sort of just taking in information. To me, that's not very interesting. So I try to do that with the plot as well. I'm trying to give you like a sense of what it must feel to be Corman in that situation. But at the same time, I want to give you like a little bit, like kernels of information. And hopefully you're piecing it together in your head. All these things come together and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's happening now.
It gets interesting. And then obviously there's a lot of stuff in play. And I'm not going to push too further into the story, but obviously these four guys, just to sum it up really quickly, because we're going to talk inside baseball about some other cool stuff in this book in a second here. But these four guys are interrogating him and then he's trying to explain it. And he doesn't have answers. And you could sense that they're trying to break him. They're saying, hey, repeat what you told us. And then they're asking further questions. And it's like, you can tell the guy's getting beat up. And you can tell that the men in suits are getting a little exhausted too. And then he's explaining the story in another way. And obviously part 3 kind of concludes all of it. And I'm purposely being vague because I might know what's going on and where this book is going with what happens, but you might not know what happens because things get very, very, very interesting in part 3. But I do want to stop right there as far as talking about the actual story itself. If you want to know what happens, you can pick it up. And we're going to talk about the pricing in a second here as well. But I do want to talk about the actual artwork in the book because it does set the tone in a lot of ways. And it has very much a pencil, almost sketch feel to it. I don't know if this thing was inked or if it's straight up pencils. It's obviously black and gray. And so what was this like? Because this is a very unique style. And it almost feels like, it feels like neo-noir. And it feels like it was almost downgraded in art purposely, if that makes any sense.
No, you'll be right. Actually, that's pretty impressive that you got all that again. I find this interesting too because when you're making these things, you're making it in a vacuum, and you're feeling, oh man, this is awesome, this is so cool. And then you start putting it together, and then you start putting it out there, and then you're like, oh man, like when it's time for it's time for the market, for the world to decide. It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh man, you're not so sure anymore. So this is very encouraging. Like when you do things in a vacuum and you realize it's appreciation. Oh man, so thank you for that. But anyway, about the artwork. So I like mixed media and I like graffiti. Like I don't actually do it myself, but I love the aesthetic behind it too. Both like what they do and the act of like going someplace and tagging a surface that you shouldn't do. Like I don't approve of that, but I like the attitude that goes with that. And I wanted to incorporate some of that here. And then as I start getting further into this, into making comics, up until I made this, I made short pieces, like a short little essay, like a little, like a 12-page appreciation for the Beastie Boys, little things like that. So I hadn't gone the distance, so to speak. I hadn't done this thing, but doing those short pieces, I kind of realized I'm not very motivated to draw. Like, I had the influence of the Marvel artwork of Jack Kirby, of like John Buscema, all these people who made just amazing stuff, and I realized that I could do that, but I'm just not motivated. I realize I'm more coming from the writing side. Like, I'm more about writing. Like, I'm more driven to, let's say, I'm going to write a story, or rather, I'm just going to have two characters sit in a room somewhere. Maybe they're in a cafe, and I'm just going to have them talk to each other and just see where things go from there. The idea of like drawing, I realize doesn't appeal to me. But on one hand, I'm like, well, I still want to make comics. So I dig a little more. I start reading stuff outside of the mainstream. I start reading out stuff outside of Marvel, and I discover certain people like Jim Mahfood. I don't know if you ever heard of Jim Mahfood. He goes by Food One. He has a style that is very cartoony, very loose. Like, he doesn't really fix things. He goes with the mistakes he makes. And I had a chance to talk to him in 2018. He was at Boston Comic Con, and he told me a little bit about the style. And the style evolved when he started doing conventions. He had a table. He started getting known, and people wanted, like, they had requests, and the line started getting longer. The line of people wanting something from him. So he had to kind of speed things up and not think so much about it. And in doing that, he kind of discovered this visual style that is very distinctly his. So when I saw that, that was like very encouraging to me. It's like, okay, so you don't need to draw like you're in Marvel or DC to tell a comic book, or even outside of that environment. But like, there are some phenomenal artists that are not in the main tent, and that was still just off-putting. So some people like Mike Mignola, for example, he has a style that is appealing to me. Like, okay, that looks doable. I can do that. Bill Sienkiewicz too. Bill Sienkiewicz, when he's not doing stuff for Marvel or DC, he has a style that is much more loose and chaotic. And like, okay, I like the energy. I like the visual energy of something that is not so labored on.
So I start to talk about this a little bit, because obviously, I mean, this book is done all by you, and it's got that gray tone pencil. I almost want to say rough around the edges, but not done poorly. But I don't know if you inked it or you did it in pen over it, but it doesn't seem like it.
We'll get more into that. I'll let you go ahead. Let me finish what you were going to say.
So what was this like, really finding this style? Because obviously, with certain books, I mean, if this was an ultra high fantasy, book, and we're talking about a mystical world, you need color in it. But this is also, you don't need color in this book, and color would probably mess up this book more than it would help it. But even like, and also the rougher style in this book helps it to some degree as well. And so what was this like, even just like saying, cool, I'm going to be doing this all myself and banging it out and having that rougher, pencil, almost having it like day one indie style is what I like to call it, where this is like, we're doing this in the most indie possible way type of art style, where like we're going back to when comics were sort of underground and that stuff. So that's how I view your book, is that, and that's not a bad thing. That's just like, this is definitely, that indie style, where this is almost like a Kevin Eastman, Peter Lard, underground comics, back in the day type of, thing.
No, you're hitting on the head. I mean, I hadn't thought that far on that, but there is definitely an element of rebellion. Like, I do like like I said, I like the attitude of people who do that. Like, they're more about, I'm going to do this, like, regardless of whether you like it or not. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to mimeograph it, I'm going to go to Comic Cons, and I'm going to approach comic book sellers by myself. Like, I like that attitude. Now, the actual thing itself, it was a bit of an experimental thing. I found these pencils called Sketch and Wash pencils. Like, you can use them dry, and they produce like a grayish that looks like regular pencil. But if you wet it, it creates grayscaling that looks a little bit like ink wash. So I was like, I couldn't really do black and white like noir. Like, you mentioned noir earlier. I'm a fan of noir, but I don't really know how to do inking in that way, that high contrast black and white. So I was like, well, let me go a few shades back from that to grayscale. Like, okay, I think I can manage grayscale. I can do that. And I cannot remember exactly how I made the decision to just pencil it and then just use the Sketch and Wash, and then just with a brush, just kind of create that gray shading. But what I liked about it that made it a lot of fun and almost sexual, I would say in a way, is after I was done with that, after I did all that, I would go over. No, actually, no. I'm sorry. First, I would do the pencil. I would do the figures in pencil, everything in pencil. Then I took gesso. I took this really opaque white gesso, and I would just coat the sheet of artwork. And what gesso does is it gives it like a rough texture, almost like approaching canvas, makes it very rough, like a rough texture. Then I would start applying the sketch and wash pencil and the wet brush, because then what that did is it made the paper thicker, it made it more resistant. So I used like a cheap mixed media paper. I think it might have been Canson mixed media, like like the most affordable paper that I could find and still have some quality. And it was like a discovery. Like when I did that, I realized that it gave me so much more leeway to do stuff with it. To do like it made the page more resistant. So I started doing things. And what I meant by sexual is that I discovered that my style, there's a lot of tactileness to it. Like when I was done with it, it was very enjoyable to run my finger. Enjoyable thing about that. I know that sounds weird, but I saw a quote by Frank Miller somewhere. He said inking is sexy. So I was like, okay, I kind of get where he's coming from when he made that statement. So it was something about that. There was something tactile about it that I found very appealing. And the roughness also is my aesthetic as well. I don't like things when they're very clean and polished. That's where my Twitter handle comes from. My Twitter handle is Robopulp. The Robo part comes from science fiction, which is my favorite genre. The pulp part comes from classic pulp fiction, you're like Black Mass Magazine, Argosy. Like these are the publications from the 30s and 40s that are known as pulp magazine. And this is also where you started seeing Dashiell Hammett start publishing the stories of the Continental Op, which led to Red Harvest, a novel that is considered to be very influential. Like all the crime fiction that you read in the present, you can almost trace it back to that novel, to Red Harvest. Raymond Chandler with Philip Marlowe, those stories first started appearing in those magazines. So I like that. I like that rough, like aesthetic. And essentially, what I'm doing is I'm combining science fiction and crime fiction or noir. And I think that tension, that sort of dynamic tension, is what I'm doing. That my genre is that sort of commingling of those two. So essentially, that was it. It was exciting. It was just wow. Like I like how this feels. Let me keep going with this. And originally, the story had no words. It was just images and action. And then lockdown happened, and I thought I didn't have enough, but I started looking at the artwork again, and I'm like, I don't know. I have something happened after the first few weeks of lockdown. Something happened in my brain that I looked at the artwork again that was from maybe 6 or 7 months ago, and I'm like, I have something here. Wait a minute. I have something. Let me push this further. Is Men in Black out behind you?
No.
You keep looking behind you. You seem nervous. It's like, what? It wasn't me. Honestly, I didn't do anything.
To even talk about that, because if you said that words were not gonna, be in it, and then obviously something clicked with that, what was that like? Because obviously, stories that just have no words in it are fascinating. I had a while back in my early days, Emily Sohan, who does a book that's all about cute dinosaurs, and she's great. It's a great book. It's an adorable book. It's cute, fantastic. She was on my show. Cool concept and very powerful.
What is her name? I'm gonna look at her.
Emily So is her name, and
Emily
basically it was no words were in it. And so, what was that like though for you? Because I've read books like Polar originally had no words by Victor Santos, and obviously he added words to it, but it also has very few words in that book. So what was that like to say, hey, I now need to add words, and how did that even change some of the artwork and that stuff? I think that's fascinating because obviously dialogue does change things.
Definitely, yeah. Initially, it was the same thing. I like also comics that have no words. I remember reading Peter Cooper's The System. Really cool comic that shows how corruption and law enforcement sort of work together, but it's like just action. Like there's just things happening. And then eventually it ends with the beginning again, like it goes full circle again, and no words. And I found that really fascinating. And I come across other works like that, but I cannot remember all of them. But made an impact on me. So I think I started with that intention of telling a story with no words, just seeing if I could do pure visuals, like can I tell something without relying on dialogue? I eventually run out of steam. The story feels like it ends, and like I didn't have enough for a novel. I thought, or at least I felt I didn't have enough for a graphic novel or a book length, like a book length novel. Um, and what happens is, I guess, COVID starts picking up. We go on lockdown, and I don't know, like I guess the whole incident, something I guess most of us lived through that for the first time ever. It did something to my brain, I guess, and I start looking at the artwork again, and I'm like, I don't know, I think I have something here. Like I took post-it notes, and I would like post one, and I would write something on it. Then I would write a response. Then I would take the next page, and I just kept doing that. And then out of nowhere, I get the idea. Well, what if I just repeat a panel? What if I just simply put a panel again, but I put different words on it, which comes from more from prose. That comes from Borges, or Luis Miguel Borges.
Let's actually talk about that too. So you brought that up, and I was actually about to ask that. So one of the things that you did that I think is ultra smart is that you obviously took a panel and you repeated it 2, 3, 4 times in a row. But what you did is that you changed that to dialogue. And one of the things is that it's obviously an interrogation scene. And I think this is ultra smart for a lot of reasons. Obviously you're the artist on this book, you're the writer, you're the whole show. So the issue wasn't money per se, but if you are not the artist, the issue can be money. And so if you have the ability to repeat the same page 3 or 4 times, pretty much you don't have to pay your artist for that page 3 or 4 times. You might only have one sport, or it might be a reduced rate. So that's one reason why on a smart position, or furthermore, even if you are paying your artist for the page, it's time. Because if you have a book that has 100 pages and you're repeating, 10 pages over and over again, all of a sudden what happens and you're changing out words, that means your book can be completed 10 times faster, essentially, because 10% of your book is already done and the guy only drew it once. And time is money. And for you, it's probably more time, but where did that idea even come from? Because I think people can pull a page out of your book, no pun intended here, to say, wait a second, I can figure out how to write a book economically. And I can write a book where if I have a bunch of scenes, I don't have to keep changing the scene. I could keep the scene the same with a bunch of pages and change the dialogue. And I think that's something that people really need to pay attention to, because people whine and complain about comics being expensive. And this is one way around it, I feel.
There is definitely an element of that. Like in my particular case, it wasn't so much skimping money. It was, part of it was experimentation. As I said earlier, the idea of like using the same panel with different dialogue comes from the fiction of, I think it's Luis Borges. There is a story about how an editor is telling a story about how a piece of text has changed, and he takes a segment from Don Luis Quixote, the novel of Don Luis Quixote, and he makes these arguments over why this text has changed over time, and then he puts the same paragraph again, and it's the same exact text, everything is the same, but what the implication of that story is that the meaning of the words has changed because of how much time has passed between when that book was published and the present, how time distorts the meaning of those words, which we see now, now that the Holocaust is far behind us now, you see people being more brazen about like hanging swastikas and talking about how Nazis are cool and all that. Like we're seeing that happening now. In my particular case was that little segment of what Borges did in that story. I wanted to experiment. I wanted to see how far can I do this before people start getting bored, there was that argument of, I want to keep you reading, I want to keep you watching, but at the same time, like, how far can I push this? How far can I take this? So it's a little bit of experimentation. And then there's also exploring tech, because I made this on separate sheets of paper, then I cropped them individually in different sizes, and using Canva, I started actually putting together the actual book. I found that they had a comic strip part, like there was in fact a template, so I just actually took that template, removed all the artwork from it, and just started pasting my own artwork and putting the bubbles and all that. So that was exciting. It was just this interdynamic of like exploring this this program, and exploring a literary trick, and like, can I take this thing that is meant for prose, for words on paper, to this visual medium. Because what I find dynamic about comics is their dynamism. Comics, you can literally do anything. There's really no limit to what you can do with comics. You can do a very straightforward action adventure, like in the style of Marvel, very dynamic and poses and all that. But you can have a very quiet, thoughtful little story as well that happens. You can have an entire story about someone maybe just standing by or sitting by the edge of a lake and just having a conversation with someone. That's totally valid. You can have something that is multimedia driven, like Howard Chaykin's American Flag, where there is everything. He throws everything into that book. Like there's visual typography for sound effects that also carry the story forward. There's just no end. Like comics is a medium that is it's old, I guess you could say, but in terms of tapping the potential of it, it still has so much room to it. So I was doing a little bit of that. I wanted to see how I can take something from prose, bring it into this medium of comics, and how long can I do something before people start losing interest. Like I would do a few pages, I would have someone read it based on what they told me. Okay, this is good, or okay, maybe I don't really need this sentence here. Maybe I can do away with this page. Little by little, I started assembling it like that. So that was it. It was just experimenting. Literally experimenting, just purely experimentation, and wanting to tell a story. Tell a story and strike a balance between storytelling and experimenting. Like comics is a vast untapped medium, but at the same time, it allows for experimentation. But you can chart a correlation between experimental and clarity. Like, let's say this is experimental, this is clarity. The more experimental you get, you start risking losing people's attention. Maybe too much clarity maybe makes the comic dull. So I was trying to scare that middle. I was trying to get that diagonal where I'm like, I'm entertaining you, I'm giving you information, but I'm also shaking your expectations a little bit.
Yeah, and then to even talk about that, because obviously comics are an experimental field by definition. And obviously, I mean, you experimented a lot with this, where you obviously experimented on the art style, giving texture to it, also telling the story the way you told the story. And obviously, part 3 is dealing with that. You also experimented, obviously, with how you even built it and putting things up and cutting certain things and even building a page. And I think this is something that people in comics, I find that a lot of people are experimenting with writing. And look, there are a bunch of good books and there are a bunch of bad books out there right now. And I think the writing experimentation is actually right where it needs to be. And people are pushing ideas, but I also think people are getting stale with their writing experimentations. But I feel like the art, and I think art in general has gotten a lot better. I think art has gotten more real. I think the levels of what can be done in a comic book as far as art has evolved massively in the last 5 years. But I also feel like people are somewhat scared to go and push out a book. And I'm curious as to why you think that is, where I think a lot of people on the art level are playing it somewhat safe in the middle of the road. I really do. And I think it's a real problem in a lot of ways. And I think the talent's there. I just think people are terrified to sort of step out. And I'm curious because I haven't exactly produced a book. I'm not an artist. I'm not a writer yet, as far as I'm published in comics. But I think the writing, as I stated, is already experimented. But I think the art hasn't caught up. And I'm curious, given that you were experimenting a lot with your book, why do you feel that is?
I guess primarily I'm going to say it's the current cultural situation, to put it bluntly, cancel culture, where if, let's say, you get the attention of a big publisher, you have something, they want it, but there's something that they might find offensive, or rather their readers might find offensive, and they're worried about the backlash, about how suddenly, all these groups are going to start coming down on the publisher. Like you're publishing, I'm not saying that is specific racism, or you're publishing something that is anti-Jew or anti-Black, or you're publishing something that is degrading to women. And this is very vague. These things are not specific, but because businesses are so afraid of being canceled, they don't even take the chance. They will not even have the discussion because there isn't even room to have a discussion. It's just they come down on you like an avalanche, and before you know it, you lost your livelihood. If you're someone who depends on making comics for a living to support your family and such, that source is just gone because the publisher might just drop you. If you're an artist or if you're a comic book artist creator, and let's say you depend on getting your books published, and you're dropped suddenly, it's like, okay, what the hell? What do I do? Like, and what is it they're talking about? I don't see that in the pages. But there's never a discussion. It's just done. You're dropped like immediately. So I think that might be it. I think that's primarily because I see it not just in comics, but literally across all entertainment. We're seeing that in movies right now. We saw that very recently with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. How Johnny Depp when this thing picked up speed, when this thing kind of came into public, he was dropped like immediately. The studios just dropped him. They wanted nothing to do with him, and now they're doing like a sort of makeup gesture to him. But before that, it was Roseanne Arnold. Before that, like we've seen that in movies and entertainment, like how this is happening. So I think that is probably the first and foremost, like this fear of just literally losing your livelihood. So that is probably the one. But because I'm not in that space, I'm not really with in a contract with any publisher. I was just kind of being driven by where the story was taking me, and I don't think it's controversial. Again, between what I perceive and what these people perceive how to be controversial or offensive is nebulous. It's a very gray area. But I guess I don't have that fear because I'm not with a publisher. I'm not in any business contract or anything like that. So I just simply went with it. And I think a lot of people who are innovators, like you said, people who want to push the boundaries, who want to take this medium and see how far it can go, they're probably online. They have a webcomic where they don't have to, go through the cost of publishing a book and then risking not selling it, and where they can just learn how to work the platforms, work the social media platforms, learn marketing or work with a marketing person, which is something that I'm interested in learning about, how to connect people to this comic book that I made, that I'm sure they like it, but they don't know that it's there. So that's where they are. The innovators are probably on the edges because they're literally pushing. They're like on the fringes and they're pushing. And they're not worried so much about the cancel culture. They're just simply taking this where it will take them, taking their curiosity where it will take them.
Well, now that we both got canceled. Oh
boy.
Clearly.
I guess we'll just go make money somewhere else, some other way.
But I mean, it's weird because I just find that the art itself isn't, being pushed. And I even just think, and I don't really know why. I don't even think it's offensive things. I think that's part of it. I even think with writing, that's part of it. But I also think that, people right now in comics are also scared to say, hey, let me lay out, $5,000 for an idea, rather when they want to say, hey, look, I want to stick with X. And I think that's also part of it too, is that I think money, and I think that, it's expensive. And I also think that the majority of people in comics are, and we're not going to get into this hopefully too much, but I think a lot of people in Kickstarter, they're barely making their goal, and they're not making a hell of a lot of money. And so I don't think they can afford to necessarily go and have an experimentation and I think your circumstance is different where you're the artist and the writer. And so you don't have that additional bill to pay to your artist if it turns out to be a disaster. But I think that that's part of it also right now, is that I speak to a lot of people in comics, and Kickstarter is a beast. I mean, it takes like $6,000 to produce your book, from art and writing and maybe a little of the printing. And so like you need to fund like $7,000 on Kickstarter to break even. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And, there's not a lot of money in all of this right now. And I think that's also the problem.
There's something to that because on Twitter, that's the platform that I spend the most time on. I interact with a lot of comic book artists and writers, and I noticed that there's a lot of Kickstarters too, which brings the element of competition also, because it's like you said, if you have to raise 6,000 or 7,000 just to be able to print, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 books and, take those to the Comic-Con and hope that you can sell them, in addition to, what it will cost to get a table, the electricity, because I don't know if we're like revealing something dangerous here, or controversial, but big Comic-Cons, you pay for a table, the price includes the table and 2 chairs. If you want electricity, that's a separate charge. If you want internet, that's a separate charge. So I don't think I'm, breaking any sacred rules here by stating that, but you're already looking at a lot of money just to be able to have a table for the weekend, for a 3-day weekend. Let's say you go to one of the big ones.
I agree, and this is why I get so pissed. And I'm very honest about it. I mean, we're about to break a bunch of cardinal rules here. It's like I ask for money for my show, right? So buy me a coffee. I get so much flack for it, but I'm like, but you're paying for a Comic-Con table, and you're paying 500, maybe $750, and I understand you're selling books. I understand there's industry connections, and I don't have that per se on this show. But at the same time, if I'm asking for $5, and you're paying $750, and you're paying for electricity, you're staying in a hotel, you got to buy food.
I didn't even account for the hotel. I didn't include the hotel. Like, you have to drive hours to the place. Yeah.
And this is where I get pissed off, because I'm like, wait a second, this thing is an ad for your book. By definition, I'm asking you questions directly related to your book. And instead, I get attacked. And then people say, well, I don't want to support you. And I'm like, wait a second. And I'm like, but you're doing A, B, C, and D. And this is what bothers me about the entire industry right now, is that you're willing to spend real money, and you're going to maybe make $250. And I'm not saying my show gets 1 million views, but if my show did get 1 million views, you wouldn't be on it, even if you had the $5. Not
you miss that.
It's so
you miss that audience. Yeah.
I don't get it, and this is why I'm so confused in the industry, and this is why I'm getting fed up with comics, and I'm very honest about it right now. Where I think that there's a lack of experimentation in art. I think the art is at the level where they can push it, and the art has gotten massively better. And look, I make a lot of money with buying and selling comics, but I'm also like, I think the industry has just gotten really weird, and I think the industry itself has gotten stale, and I think it's a real problem. I think that, and I've never said this before, and I'm curious how you feel about it, but I think we're in a winter in the comic industry. I think that there's going to be a lack of growth of ideas, and I think whatever level we're at, it's going to be a good 6 to 7 months, and I don't think the bar is going to be raised up, and I think that growth level is going to be very hard for the next.
I think so. Yeah. I think it's also in a state of staleness. I would say it's in a state of crisis. Like the people who make the decisions about what to publish, going back to the whole cancel culture and all that, they don't really know what to put out, because they're afraid that anything that you put out after you spend the money printing the books, marketing, and all that, then gets canceled. Like, it doesn't sell. So like you mentioned, they stay with what seems to be getting approved. It's not making money, but it's not getting canceled.
I think that's partially with Marvel and DC, but I'm even talking just about Kickstarter. I'm not even worrying about Marvel.
Okay.
I think Kickstarter, I think we're in for a rough 6 to 7 months, because I think that next level to get to, and those ideas and hashing out those ideas, I don't think that there are many of them left. And I think that a lot of people are repeating it. I don't think they want to experiment. Like, you were experimenting with Canva. You were experimenting with different ideas. Like, I don't see that on a lot of people's campaigns. And I interview a lot of people. I mean, I've interviewed probably at least 50 to 70 people in comics, and I'm not seeing that experimentation in books. And I think it's a real issue. And I think we're going to have a very complicated 6 to 7, possibly 8 months, where I think that people are going to be like, what are we doing here in comics?
Yeah.
It's a serious problem.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, like because that experimentation is not there. They're maybe aiming. It's almost like they're doing a comic book according to, like, if they were looking for trending, like if they were doing a Google search for whatever's trending, that's what they're going to make, because they can put that on an SEO on their website, or they can put that on an SEO for their Kickstarter. But as you point out, that's causing this glut of Kickstarters that are pretty much the same thing, like I like to help out, I like to donate, but like I like to put the idea forward that I'm helping something that is more dangerous than fun, I guess. Like, I want something that will get people talking, like will get people pausing, like, what is this? Like, think in your life when you read a short story or a novel or a comic book that you were like what the fuck is this? Like, what am I looking at? Like, it's something that made you pause and take notice. Like, this thing is off the charts. This is like, this makes the genre feel new again. This makes the format of comics feel new and fresh. I want that. But as I said, I'm looking at on Twitter where that's where I'm most active. And it's just Kickstarter after Kickstarter, and they all look the same. They all look the same. So it's like,
let me ask you a question, because I'm going to ask you a question about that.
Okay, go ahead.
What do you think is the same about them? Because I have my opinions, but I'm curious about your opinions because I spend time on Twitter too. What are you seeing a lot of? Why they look the same, and what is actually being pushed out? Because I can tell you what I think, but I'm curious what you think.
Okay. Well, what I see, again, this is an impression just from looking at scrolling on Twitter, is pseudo superhero. It doesn't quite look like Marvel, but in some way or other, it vaguely looks super heroic. It has the traditional outfit of the superhero. The proportions are super heroic. And it's almost the same story. Like, I think the ones that are different are the horror ones, like horror or something action. Like, I'm looking at one right now starring the character is female and it's black and white. So that caught my attention. The fact that the visual style is different and it seems to have violence, it seems to have action, but everything else is almost like you're buying a post, like you're buying the cover. You know how like Marvel covers are like that's what I'm seeing when you look at the Kickstarter. I'm seeing that. So it's almost like they're selling you that thing. And it's like, well, it's kind of like Marvel, but not quite. It's Marvel, but it's not quite like that's the impression that I'm getting, that it's just they're doing something that seems to be doing really well, not just in comics but in the MCU as well. Maybe they're creating something, but they're thinking beyond the comic book into possibly a series, in a streaming service, or maybe a movie. Like maybe they're thinking that far ahead. They're thinking of like ancillary rights. They're thinking of franchises. They're thinking of things. Instead of saying, I'm going to tell this story and I'm going to make this story the best story that I can tell about this particular thing.
See, what I'm seeing right now, and look, I'm in this space as an investor, but not an indie, is I'm seeing a lot of bad girl art coming out. And I'm seeing a lot of people doing certain covers with certain artists. Everybody's booking those artists, and all of those covers seem the same. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing anything with story. And look, this art is good, but I'm like, this art is not, there's 14 other covers that look the same. And I'm not seeing anything different. And those covers are going to do well. And there's money, but there's going to get to a point where it's like, what the fuck's the story? What are we buying? And obviously, I mean, I'm going to be talking about this at some point on my YouTube channel, but it's the idea that there's 14 covers that all look the same. They're all done by the same guy on 14 different campaigns. And I'm like, what am I buying here? And I'm like, I like that cover, but I don't like that cover. And like, I'm seeing a lot of stuff where, and look, I'm a cover guy. I like making money with covers, and I do all right with it. But I'm like, wait a second, like, this is how we're killing the industry. And this is the whole problem, where there's going to get a point where bad girl art does sell, but it doesn't, it's oversaturated. And that's the whole problem I'm having right now with the entire industry, is that this is where we're at. And look, in the last day with a bunch of my friends, I have seen legitly, I think I've seen like 25 covers that all look the same. And I'm like, I don't want any of them, and they're bad girl art. For a variety of reasons. They all look the same. They don't look different. I don't know anything about the book. And I'm like, they're probably going to do well for a while, but it's going to get to a point where this thing breaks and all of it falls, and they're also not investable. And I think that this is the problem that's ensuing right now in the entire, Marvel industry.
I think, yeah, what you describe actually sounds almost like what happened with comics in the early 90s. Because of the success of Image Comics, people started buying comics, not for the content, but for speculation. Like, they would buy them and they would sit on them, not realizing that saturation actually made them obsolete. So, when they started coming out with the holographic cover, the holographic variant cover, the All-Stars edition cover, like, they had all these covers, and that really had no substance. Really, there was nothing behind it, but because people were buying them, they were overproducing it. They were oversaturating the market with covers. So now it sounds like we're getting the digital version of that. Like we're getting, like you said, I guess an artist is doing well. Whoever this is that is getting asked by these people to do their cover work, he's doing phenomenal. He or she or him, like great for you. But the people who are creating this, like you're investing all this money. I'm coming from a different place, I guess. I'm thinking more, I want something that you read and maybe it'll stay with you and maybe it'll make you read it a second time and maybe you'll share it with someone else. I think they want to grab you for the immediate money, for the immediate, to break even. Like you said, they want to break even. After that, maybe they might not even make the comic book. Maybe they might say, oh no, let's just do something else. And we'll have that guy draw a cover again and we'll just launch another Kickstarter. Maybe it's possible you make more money doing that than creating an actual thing, an actual book.
Hey, look, I'm all for variant art. I'm not here to not say it, but I also understand that we're going to be killing the cow soon. And it's a real problem. And it's like, I'm looking at it and I've seen 25 covers that all look the same and I know nothing about the book. And I'm like, I don't want it. And look, I'm also backing out of Kickstarter. I'm taking like a month or two off. So I might be slightly biased, but I'm looking, I'm like, I don't know anything about this book. I don't even remember. Like, I remember what the covers looked like. If you showed me the covers, like, oh, I saw that one, that one, that one. But I don't know anything about the book, and it's a real problem. Where, and look, I mean, it's bewildering to me, and I think this is where we're going. And I think it's a whole bigger issue that's occurring, and I think that this is actually going to kill Kickstarter. I really think this is going to kill Kickstarter. And the reason why I say it the way I'm saying it, for anybody who's going to challenge me, I'm more than happy to have that discussion, is that there's going to get a point where you have a bunch of variants and then you don't have enough money to cover it because nobody wants them, because there's an oversaturation. And I think it's coming, and I think this recession is going to affect it, and I think that there's a bunch of problems coming with it. But that's a different video, and that's a long form discussion.
No, I think that you're right. Yeah. No, I think that you're right. That's what's going to happen. Like there's this some impulse to get these things out as soon as possible. And one, the quality is going to suffer. And second, like you said, you're going to reach this point of saturation where you'll have to shove them into people's hands to get them to take them, because they'll say, okay, no, I'm not buying any more of this because right now, like you said, there's a recession. I need to balance my portfolio. I need to draw funds from here.
I think it goes further than that. I think what's going to happen is that I think a lot of these books are going to have to be sold at cheaper positions because you have to order a certain amount and there's going to be limited editions of it. But I also think that like the last 10 or 15 or the last 20 you have of a book, I don't think they're going to move out all that quickly. And I think you're going to order extras and they're going to be like, these aren't moving. And I think also like, you pay for art, and I think that is going to be a hard sell, because guess what? When there's 25 books where you can't go wrong, you're competing with 25 other campaigns that have similar art, that it all looks the same. And I just think that is going to be a bigger problem, and I think that it's going to kill Kickstarter. I really do, because I think this is what's going to bankrupt people. I really do, because if you just spent $400 for a cover, and that cover doesn't sell, but all these people did it. I mean, you might say, oh, $400 is only $400. I mean, I could tell you that $400 goes a long way in my business, and it's these stupid decisions that bankrupt companies. Because if you were expecting that 400 to turn into 1,600 and it turns into only 300, that means that you're $1,300 short of what you were expecting. And it creates a bigger problem. That means that your next campaign might get hit hard. So, I mean, I just think it's bewildering, and enough of that, though. I mean,
well, actually, before you change the topic, how would this affect Kickstarter? Because it seems to me what Kickstarter, how it works, I don't know, but don't they take a % of every campaign?
It affects Kickstarter. I'll explain how it affects Kickstarter. It affects Kickstarter because if I thought I was going to do $20,000 and I only did $12,000, Kickstarter gets their fees. So Kickstarter is not directly, I mean, they got less money, obviously, because they take their percentage. But now how it affects Kickstarter is that you might not come back so quickly for your next campaign. You might not come back so vigorously for your next campaign. You might not want to bring back that book, or you might leave that position completely. And so obviously it affects, because it affects the bottom line. When Kickstarter is just the distribution platform, the product is the comic. So if you had a variant that failed, or you have multiple variants that failed, and you were expecting to do more, it's going to naturally affect the underlying product and Kickstarter's distribution. So if I have a
Okay.
comic book, and I'm putting it out on Kickstarter, and it didn't do as well, that's going to affect how I retool, how I position it, how I function. And it also, people also, if you need $9,000 to get your artwork and fund your book, and you found the $6,000 to start your comic, and you basically, that's your startup money, and then you're recouping it for the next issue, but you only did 7, you're not going to put out your second issue so quickly, because you didn't raise enough
Mm.
capital. And that's the other thing, how this all works. So if you are looking to do 20 and then you don't hit that 20, you might not get your third issue out for 6. If you were trying to do it every 4 months, it might take you another 2 months, which affects Kickstarter, because that means that they're not collecting 3 times a year. They might be collecting 2 times a year.
Okay, I see. Okay, I understand now. I see. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess whoever runs Kickstarter, I wonder if they're thinking of that. Like maybe they're running numbers and seeing if long term, or even like you said, that within the next 6 to 8 months, are they looking at some data, maybe taking steps? Because I was in a discussion you had a few weeks ago where we discussed that, because Kickstarter changed the terms of agreement to, I guess, accommodate not explaining what happened when you collected your final take on the after their fee and all that. They were changing the terms of service to something that you and I guess on some members of the debate felt that it would affect them as creators.
That was a discussion, for those who are interested, was doing projects back to back and fulfillment issues, which has always been a problem on Kickstarter. It's a problem on Indiegogo. It's a problem anytime you outlay money for Project X, and you have to wait a certain amount of time. And obviously, I'm a big proponent that I don't think you should be able to run projects back to back. I think that's
Mm.
actually a horrendous policy, because it opens up the door for corruption. It opens up the door for excuses. I'm waiting on books that I've been waiting on for over a year now. And look, things happen, and I'm not here to punish people, and I understand it's a big business, but I don't think you should be able to run your campaign until you fulfill. And I think that would change the way business is done, and I think it'd be a healthy thing. Actually, I really do.
I think so, yeah. I mean, because it ties into what you said now, where like people start selling you a cover and maybe a synopsis, and then they just run multiple campaigns of that rather than actually saying, this is a series of comic books that you're going to start seeing them. They could just keep doing that in perpetuity until they think they have enough money, and then just simply, oh, because of something that happened, we cannot finish. We're unable to finish. So we're sorry. I don't know. We'll be in touch. We'll send a newsletter. Stay in touch with our newsletter or whatever.
It's beyond complicated, but again, this is a whole big discussion. I definitely want to bring it back to you though in your book,
Oh,
because
okay.
you
All
do
right, sure.
something interesting where you're not on Kickstarter,
No,
and for good reasons, and this is where we're
yeah, because I wanted to, like, I considered it briefly, but as I said, I see so many people on Kickstarter. I'm like, how can I make myself different from this? How can I stand out from all this glut of Kickstarter people looking for money for their comics? I'm like, maybe I'll lean more into just simply using the web. Like, I guess the contrast of everything we discuss here is the people who are posting their comic on a web, like simply showing it there for free and just building that fan base. They're putting in the time, they're actually putting out stories, and they're building that fan base. And I figure if they simply just stay there, they build that audience. I think the audience will actually pay for those things, and they'll pay for limited edition cover,
So
something
let's
like that.
talk about this a little bit, because what you do is untraditional, and you're using Gumroad right now, and you're utilizing a very interesting position where you're utilizing pay what you think is fair model, and this is my experience with that. Is I think that if you say, hey, pay what you think is fair. Obviously, it gets a little complicated when you actually have a physical good, versus a digital good. A
Mm.
digital good is easier to say, hey, what do you think this is worth? Why don't you pay me, right? That because a digital good doesn't cost you anything beyond what it costs you to create it. Um, versus a physical good where it actually costs you X amount of money. But even still, what I find is that people say, okay, I this is a 60-page book and I think it's worth $5. And I think people genuinely in society are pretty admirable. And I think people say, look, I think it's worth X, or they might have read it and they might have gave you $1 and then say, you know what, it was worth more than $1. So
Mm.
what is this like for you? Because obviously when somebody pays, you get their email per se, which is worth money, but also I think it's an interesting experiment in of itself, saying, hey, look, what do you value my project at? And look, is I mean, different people are in different situations and they're like, look, I can only afford X or I can only afford Y. So, but what was this like even coming up with this on Gumroad? Because I think that's something that is a very interesting business model.
Yeah, like I said, I'm doing that because first of all, I'm not so interested in selling the comic as I am in building an email list, and part of it has to do with that. I don't really consider myself a cartoonist per se, like a comic book artist writer, as so much as a writer who makes comics. So I'm more interested in exploring storytelling across a variety of media. So I started with a comic because that was the easiest thing for me to do. But I'm interested in filmmaking also. I'm interested in web series. I'm interested in audio drama. I'm interested in all these other forms of storytelling that are now fairly easy to do. The technology allows us to do this. Like you and I could create something like that, just working, you and your part of the world, me and my part of the world. We could create something that way. So it's more about collecting, putting a fan base together who will be enjoying what I do, like the particular stories that that I'm creating, which is science fiction and incorporating noir. Like those two things create the genre that I exist in. So it's more about that. So I was like, you know what, do that, because the opposite would be like I anticipate a lot of stress and frustration if I were to go the route of the Kickstarter. And second, because I don't really know how to use the platforms. I don't really know how to take advantage of the social media platforms, which is one of the things that I guess is why I started doing these things, reaching out to podcasters and people like that, because I want to pick their brains, the people who have become successful at it. I want to hear their stories. Like, how did you get to where you are today? How did you eventually build the fan base that supports you now? Because I'm interested in doing a similar thing. So I just took it at that sense. I took it. I don't know anything. I know nothing. So let's just start small, start simple and accessible, and just keep building on that, rather than dive into something that is overwhelming and it's going to give me stress and it's going to cause me headaches and frustration when the deadline passes and I'm only like 1% of the goal. Or like no, like let's not do that. Especially now that I see so many Kickstarters, I see so many people doing that. I'm like, let me go in the opposite direction of that. So it's a little frustrating in the sense that it's not consistent. I'll have like a series of downloads for 1 week, but then for 1 week I have nothing. Then a few downloads the next week. So I'm very interested in, how can I make this consistent? How can I keep the downloads in a fairly consistent basis? Not in the hundreds of thousands, but a steady trickle of downloads every week. I'm very interested in learning that and talking to people who do branding, social media marketing, and things like that.
Because what I think is interesting is that I'm a big proponent of the idea of saying, look, and this is what I want with this show is I want to say, hey, look, I would love to have a free model. And then if somebody finds value and they felt that, hey, this interview was really good, let me throw you some money here. And I tried doing that. I really did. And it really didn't work
Mm.
where and some people did, some people didn't, and some people were very supportive and others were not. And so it's a real issue, I think, where I think it's tricky to figure out how to get people to pay for your work, how to get people to respect your work, and respect and pay are not the same per se, but it's a very complicated issue. And I think though that at least with this and I mean I would do it with my comic class, but I feel like people would take advantage of it. And so that's why I'm so fascinated about what you're doing because you're giving away. If somebody doesn't want to pay for a 127-page graphic novel, I mean, they could simply download it by the email, but at least you're getting their email,
Mm.
and that's important of itself. So I mean, that's why I'm so fascinated by this because I actually think it's a solution. I was having a guest on before you, and they want to give their comic digitally away for free. So and I made the recommendation for them to do this, and hopefully he's watching. And I said, hey, maybe you should set it up like this, because you're going to give your book away for free anyway, digitally. Why wouldn't you want, maybe somebody's going to throw you $3 for it and say, hey, I view it as X. And so, obviously, I think this is a very interesting model in that front. And I think it's also somewhat of the future, where you're like, hey, look, if I'm interested in building an email list, and also I'm don't have a problem giving my book away for free, but if somebody wants to say, hey, look, I appreciate what you've done, so that's how I want to view this show. Like, I would love obviously I want to cover my bills with this show. There's no question about it. But if people were to say, hey, look, I get it. You need money. Thanks for the interview. Here's $10. At the end of it, I would not be running a Kickstarter. If people were actually altruistic and appreciated it, and I think that's where this gets complicated in comics right now, is that there's people who are building a business, and there's people like you who say, look, right now I'm not building a business, but I do need the economic support.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's and I really have no answer for that, because like I said, this is a new area for me. Like, this is, I feel, where I failed in the past. Like, I've written screenplays, I've done short films, but it's always the issue. Okay, now that the thing is done, now what? Like, I usually that's usually where I choke, at that stage where now you got to put it out there, and you want people to pay for it, or at least engage in a meaningful way. And that's the part that I really don't know anything about. That's the part that I'm just not sure of what to do. Like, this is suggested donation, but I'm like, well, instead, if you like the comic book, share the link. Like, bring a friend into it. Let's go into this and bring our world together. The other possibility is, maybe there are people who are in the same place as me, who want to do things, but they're not finding solid people to work with. Like I said, I wanted to make a independent film for a long time, like just a bunch of people getting together, pooling their resources, and just making it. Just like again, guerrilla style, independent style. But I haven't found people like that. So, well, maybe this way I will find them. Maybe they are people who, like me, they want to do things, but they don't have solid people to work with. Maybe this is one way to do that. Let's just simply put this thing out there. I made this, but I'm interested in other media. I'm interested in other forms of storytelling, audio, filmmaking, web series. If you're interested, if you're in the same position as me, let's talk about this. Maybe we can do something together and amplify our reach by working together. That's how I'm going with it.
It's an issue. I think you know what it is. I think you nailed something perfectly. It's something that I talk about, and I'm having a real issue where it's just, if you want to come on my show, you got to bring something to the table. You being a guest is not good enough anymore. I appreciate people being a guest. Don't get me wrong, but guess what? I legitly, if I post today up on my Facebook wall and in 5 Facebook groups, I could book the rest of the year in about an hour if I wanted to. 3 interviews in comics without any money. It's not anymore about that. What it is, and I don't say that to brag, anybody in this industry can do it. It's finding quality guests. It's finding guests who know people. And so if somebody solicits me, I'm going to start saying, hey, look, are you going to share it out? Are you going to promote it? Do you have a newsletter? Because I want more people to see my show. Who do you know in comics that you could help me with? Get on my show. Or do you have money? No offense to anybody, but you got to bring at least 1, if not 2 of those things. And I'm not trying to be mean about it, but like, if you know somebody in comics who did a variant cover for you and I don't know them, make an introduction for me, because that's a really good way how to get on my show. It's a really good way how to get on my show. And if somebody brings me an artist and, oh yeah, I know him, he's my best friend, and I think that's a big issue that's having in comics right now, is that that connection. And I think that and I think a bunch of people are like you, that they just want to create, because in the Kickstarter world, it's very interesting, where there are people who saying, look, I like this as a hobby, and it's a self-sustaining hobby, and I'm not looking to make millions of dollars off of this. And then there's people who are running it like a business, and this is a business to me, in which that it serves a lot of purposes, and I'm trying to make it that it produces me X amount of money per year, or that there's enough stuff somewhere 10 years down the road where I could sell the backlog content to like a podcasting company and license it out. So, there's a lot of potential with this because it's a lot of IP.
I agree with you. Yeah, like it's not just to simply be on a podcast, but like you said, bring value. Like it feels like that expression gets overused, but that's really what it comes down to. Like, go there and bring something. If, like you said, bring maybe another artist, bring some. If not, try to give something that makes your podcast memorable, makes it memorable. So it is true. No, definitely bringing value to it. And what you mentioned
Introduce
about
me to somebody. It's a
exactly.
great saying. Introduce me to somebody. And look, I understand that people don't have necessarily connections. And look, I know a lot of people in comics, but guess what? If you have an artist, introduce me to your artist. You got a newsletter. Boom. If you're running a Kickstarter, put my interview at the bottom of the Kickstarter for sake. I mean,
Yes.
you could embed a YouTube video, by the way, and an interview into a Kickstarter that it actually plays while because I've done it. I actually did an interview with somebody and I put it before the link was going up there, essentially the YouTube thing, and boom, this way when the interview was done it was already processed into my Kickstarter for Tristan Thompson, or TriStar. He's known by.
Okay.
So everybody got and saw that thing on my Kickstarter 5 days before. And if you click the link, there was a countdown. And then when the interview was done, boom. So congratulations. If you're on my show and I'm interviewing you, you got a Kickstarter, you could put it at the bottom of the page. You could say, hey, I was interviewed by so-and-so. And you could embed it into the bottom of the Kickstarter. That's bringing value. And I think it's a real problem. I really do.
It sounds like you could almost make a part of your interview the Kickstarter pitch. Like you could actually take a few seconds to talk about your Kickstarter in your show itself, and actually maybe take that and put it on the top of the Kickstarter where you put in the pitch to the comic book or whatever it is. It sounds almost like you could do that.
This entire show is about people's comics, and it gives people an ability to promote themselves, introduce themselves, and it's permanent. And I just don't get it. Why, people feel like it should be free. I don't get it. You're getting a permanent advertisement is really what you're getting. And you might say, oh, there's only 5 views on this, or there's only 200 views, and other shows have bigger views. And that's true. But again, you should be paying those shows too.
Well, would that show even be willing to see him? That show, maybe they're getting professionals, they're getting people in the industry. And it's like, who are you? Like, I don't really have time for you. I'm booked all the way into like October or November. I'm sorry. Try me in January of next year. Like, they might say something like that. But it's like, you're willing to listen to them,
That happens all the time. Why do you think people hit up a bunch of shows? Because guess what? A lot of shows get booked up. And I am very reactionary as a show, where my week plans, so today is Thursday. I started planning next week yesterday.
Wow. So you really got solid.
I mean, legitly, I plan. Usually I finish up on Wednesdays now, and I start planning the next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, get planned that Wednesday that I finish up. So I do 2 interviews on my Wednesday usually, and after 10:30, that's when the next week gets planned for Tuesday and Wednesday. So we're talking a 5 to 6 day turnaround time. That's why my show, that's why people hit me up. It's bewildering, but I digress. This interview is not about me, and it's turning into that, clearly.
Well, I find that interesting though, because you're exposing me to a side of this thing. Like I want to also make this a business, but I need to talk to people to get started. I need to get into that business side of things.
I'm a little agitated today.
That's okay. No, we can talk another day. No, but I realized that's the part of the reason why I'm doing this, because I need to talk to people outside of my little bubble, because I'm not learning. I'm not taking new information. I'm not taking new information that can help me make new decisions.
I also think just the industry has gotten weird in the last few weeks. I really think in the last 3 months there's been a change, and maybe it's me. I don't know, but since January and since I launched my campaign, and I was speaking to somebody, and I don't think he's gonna mind me. I'm not gonna say who it was, but he was saying when I started to not give my information out for free, people started to not talk to me, and I think
Mm.
that's a really good way to put it. Where I've now started to say, wait a second, I gotta start looking at people. I gotta start thinking about who should belong on my show. I have to start thinking about who's been good to me, who's been bad to me, and I think that's a real issue where you've obviously been nice to me. You know, my guest before you's been nice to me. Certain people have, when I have an issue in comics, have taken care of me and made sure that I'm taken care of. But then there's other people who were on my show and they weren't good guests and they haven't been supportive. And so I think that's the issue where I've changed and I'm very honest about it. Where I think I've just started saying, look, if you want on my show, you know, I'm sorry to say it, but I run a pretty professional show.
You need to come prepared. You know, if you're gonna be on my show, come prepared, come correct, come. You know,
And we're talking about your book. We're not, most of the time we're talking about your book. This episode's a little different.
it's a little different, yeah. But like I said, I'm looking for different information. But if you want to go ahead, ask me about the book. Go ahead. Like, if you want to ask me more about that.
So obviously, I mean, you're doing something different. Where I do appreciate the Gumroad thing. I think it's fascinating. It's obviously a graphic novel for those who are interested in it. And I'm gonna let you promote it because the problem with your book, man, is I don't want to ruin it for everybody. This is the whole problem.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, because I want to say, but I want to tease it and give you a teaser, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to say it. I want you to go read it and find out. You know.
The problem is that, Melvin, let me ask you a question. When you rub a genie out of a lamp, what can't you do with the genie until your wishes are gone? It's not a trick question.
What can you do with the genie?
So you get a magic lamp, Melvin, right? And you get 3 wishes when you rub the magic lamp, right?
Yes.
What can't the genie not do until your last wish?
Well, he cannot. He has to grant you the first wish or the second wish, depending where you are in the 3 wishes.
So he can't go back into the bottle, right?
Okay, yeah.
Gone, right?
You brought up an interesting question. How did you get him back in the bottle once it's out? I guess you can, or in the lamp, I guess.
Right. That's the problem if we continue talking about part 3 with your book.
Oh, it'll just keep going and going, yeah.
Once we let it out, the genie can't go back into the bottle.
Yeah. Okay. I understand now. Okay. Yes.
So
yeah.
this is the problem I have with your book, man. It's we cannot have a full discussion about your book because it will ruin it for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like the thrill of, like, you know, getting to that stage and seeing how things happen, and then, oh, this is how it ends. I'm like, oh wow. Yeah. So I appreciate you, doing that. You're kind of talking around it, but not directly. Talking in code, like you said at the beginning.
Yes. Frank Sinatra, Denzel. That's all I'm gonna say.
Henry Silva as the Asian guy.
Yes. so many things. Some very interesting relationships with mommies is all I'm going to say. Many things to be said in code here. But I definitely want to back out of completely ruining my career here.
Okay, sure, sounds good. However you want to go.
Yours as well. And I definitely want to dive into, and I'm curious your opinion on this. Definitely talk about where you think cons are going, because this is something that I think it's not controversial, but obviously we just have gone through the COVID era. I think, and I don't mean to speak down or ill about this, but I think the con shutting down era is long past. I think that there is damage from it. I think that there is, changes that are going to be implemented. I think some cons are not coming back, and I think some are going to pop up again. And so I'm curious how you feel that is all going to go. And I even am curious where you think creators are going to respond to, because I've heard a mixed bag of good stuff and bad stuff with it.
Okay, so I guess let's start with the big one, like San Diego Comic-Con. I think that one's gonna be okay because that one I've never been there, but from what I understand, San Diego Comic-Con is now largely accommodating the new MCU product, like the new stuff that Marvel's gonna release next year, and DC. That's where they introduce it, and that has kind of pushed out the independent artists to the point that I guess a lot of them stopped going to that. And from what I hear, it's difficult to go there. Like you have to book if you want to go next year. You have to get your tickets now. You have to get everything now because to be able to get a table there, like a tiny little space, is difficult. But because that's supporting the industry, and Marvel is doing phenomenal right now. Marvel doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime in the near future. They'll probably be okay with that and New York Comic Con. And the smaller ones in between, I imagine, like you said, some are gonna go away. But I almost see like the individual Comic Con, like the Comic Con tailored to you and your fans. Let's say you're a creator and you're able to book a place, not big, not a massive place, but let's say like the local Moose Lodge, like or the local veterans social club. You can book a place like that. You charge a cover price that includes maybe your books, like maybe it takes into account the book that you were selling, and you can just literally have a Comic Con where like your fans are there, and it's your fans, the people who are there because of you, and it can be all about you, as opposed to when you go to a Comic Con and you're trying to split your attention among many people. So maybe that's what's going to happen next.
Let me ask you a question, because I'm a big believer in digitalization pivot 2.0, where everything is moving to the digital idea, where you're selling physical books on places like Shopify, your website, live sales, eBay, and that you need to have a bigger digital footprint. And I'm a strong believer that we are definitely moving to that side of things. And I think that, you need to now have a massively bigger, position. I mean, in that space. And that I think things like this, people say, oh, they're going to be dying out. I think podcasts and Facebook Lives, they were big in the middle of Facebook. I think they're just getting started, because I think that, having a bigger thing on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever and however you view your content, I think that's only getting bigger and larger. And I think it's a necessity. So I'm curious how you feel that deals with cons, because honestly, we were speaking about it, but cons are expensive. If you're a brand new creator, to go to a decent size con, it could be $250 with electricity, it could be an issue, and you could be spending $500 with electricity. Maybe it's $400 with electricity. I don't know, but it's still your time. It's still your energy. It's still you sitting around. You got to sell versus, doing an interview or having a Shopify store. So I'm curious where you feel that's going, because to me, it's somewhat of a toss up on how it's all going to shake out.
I think maybe it's going to take some time, because maybe some people are afraid of, like some creators they've been doing that. Let's say older creators, people who have been doing it for a while. They're so used to the con, that the idea of maybe striking out and maybe creating their own Comic Con, like creating an event where they can hang out with their fans specifically, might be too revolutionary. Like they might stay with the Comic Con, even though it's diminishing returns. Like you said, it gets more expensive every year. The hotel gets more expensive. They are not making as much money as they used to, but they will not break away from that. Whereas maybe people who, like you said, they create a digital footprint and they actually have data. They can say, let me go to my newsletter, to my fans, my email list. Let me put this question out there. Hey, how would you guys feel if I were to take a 200 square foot space and just have my books there, and you come over and I sign your book and you buy your book? Like, I think that they're more open to that idea. Whereas people who are crossing over, who come from the age of the Comic Con, where that was it, the Comic Con was the only thing, might have a harder time transitioning to the idea of like all these alternate venues, or like maybe, let's say, 2 or 3 creators get together and they say, hey, we're going to be at this place. We're going to be at, I don't know, they find an open classroom somewhere in their college, in their town. Come on over, like put banners pointing with arrows pointing. They just simply take a classroom in a college, like in a college in a sleepy town, where they can just simply do that. Like maybe, hey, come on over, sign the books, like almost make it like a clandestine act. Like Little things like that. I imagine little acts like that where you feel like you're a part of something. You're part of the in crowd. You were part of that experience. That's kind of what those are ideas that I have in mind of doing. Because the Comic Con, I'm gonna try to tell you this as briefly as possible. In 2019, the year before pandemic happened, on impulse, I decided to get a table at Boston Comic Con. I do that. It's really expensive to get a table, get the electricity, get all that. It wasn't very far. I was taking the train. I print out a bunch of mini comics of the short pieces that I've done up until that point because, like, I want the experience. Like, I want that. Like, I want to do that. I want to be there. I want to interact with people. I do it Friday night. The event opens. Literally nothing happens. Friday night it's over. Like nothing. But I was like, it's cool. Like tomorrow, it's the first day. It'll be better tomorrow. I go back Saturday. I'm there all day. I talk to some people. Like the whole day goes by. I sold nothing. Like literally nothing. I didn't sell a thing. At this point now, I didn't even want to come back on Sunday. But I was like, I pay for the table. Just go there anyways. Who knows? Maybe things will turn around. I go Sunday again. It ends a little earlier Sunday. But literally the whole weekend went by. I sold nothing. Like I sold this. I sold nothing. And that just sent me into first it made me depressed. It bummed me out. But then like after, that initial self-pity period passed, I realized it's just my own fault. Like I can't blame this on anybody because first of all, I didn't tell people that I was going to be there. And when I dug deeper into that, I realized that the reason was I didn't really want to tell people. I didn't want to fully own the whole thing. I didn't want to I'm going to be here. Come on over. I have these mini comics. Come on, sign them. I was kind of embarrassed about the idea of doing that. I was like, to quote Seth Godin, I didn't want to be on the hook. I wanted to just sort of be there, but not fully own the experience of being there. And that's the incident that sent me into where I am now talking to you. It made me realize I need to be more scientific about this. I need to have a plan. I need to have a method. I need a system. So let's start with the fact that I don't really have a comic book. All I have is just short pieces. You need a book. You need something book-length. So that's what I work on the next few months. Then 2020 starts. Everything that happens for the first part of 2020 happens. And I'm out of work now. And because of everything that happened since then, I'm really more into personal growth. And I realized, okay, this is an opportunity. I needed something. I need a book. I have time to work on my book now. I have unemployment coming. I'm going to be out of work. I ended up being out of work for a little over 4 months. And it's like, I use that time. And I use that money to create this book. And it's the process that keeps building to me talking to you now about having a system, having a plan, having a method to do things. So as much as it sucks, it's something that sent me on the right path. It got me thinking the right way about this. And I don't know if I answered your question or not, but the incident made me realize Comic-Cons are expensive. Comic-Cons are very expensive, and I don't recommend that unless you have an audience in place already.
The way I view it is that it all goes back to risk tolerance. It all goes back to ideas of what you want to do. It also all goes back to how you want to allocate your capital. So I like allocating my capital slightly different. One of the things is that obviously when I run, if I have a book in mind that I want to do, but I'm just stabilizing my economics first, which I think is the smartest thing to do. But I'm probably not going to do Comic-Cons because I'm probably going to want to do things more like just move it all over to my eBay business. And then I will make a direct sale to my eBay business off of the Kickstarter. One business will pay another, and then I'll distribute it through eBay, Facebook, and run it through that side of things. Because to me, it's just how I would like to allocate the capital. I'd rather be on a bunch of people's shows. I'd rather pay for Facebook ads. And I think that's really what it all comes down to, where I don't think that connections are very easy to make now. I think it's not that hard to make connections. I think, honestly, it's an email away. Today, I've legitimately shot 20 emails to people. Picking up a phone, it's not that hard. And so that's how I view things, is that I just think it comes back to allocation of capital and time. And I think that there's going to be a generation that says, I like hanging out with people, but I also am running a business. And what is the best use of my time? But that's what I think. But we've been speaking.
I feel the same, actually. I feel the same. Like I said, that incident made me realize, like, they're as fun. It's a fun thing to attend a Comic Con and have a table, but there's a business side to things. Like it costs a lot of money to go to a Comic Con, so it's something that maybe use, like you said, leverage email, leverage the social media platforms, build an audience, build the network, build a community, and then decide maybe if you want to go to a Comic Con, or maybe go to a the smaller Comic Cons, or maybe you could even create your own Comic Con for like a specific set of people. Because one thing about Comic Cons that happens with me is I go to these events, I pay, you pay the full price, which is also pretty pricey. When you go through Ticketmaster and you add all the costs, like a $25 ticket winds up costing almost $50 after all that. And the thing is, when I go to a Comic Con, I'm usually going for one or two things. Like 85% to 90% of what's in the Comic Con, I don't care about. I'm just looking to meet one specific person, maybe two or three specific people, and that's it. Like after I'm done that, I buy some collectibles and I'm done. So like it's almost like not a good place for me. Like it's really not a place for me. Like unless Comic Cons get more and more specific to audiences, to very specific things, they'll have to survive basically on the money from Marvel, on Marvel money, or on if they're able to get a write off. Maybe they're able to get a Comic Con that is something of a write off for the community that's holding the Comic Con.
Right. So obviously we've been speaking for almost 2 hours.
Wow, amazing.
Tomorrow, guys. So my throat needs to rest.
Yeah, let's give Andrew a poor break. He's been talking all day and sending emails and talking to people. So, and I'm a little tired too, man. It's been a long day for me.
I want to give you an opportunity to self-promote yourself. So where can people find you on social media? Where can people follow you on Twitter, Facebook? Where can people get the book? Where can people not get the book? Where can people give you $5 for the book? All that fun stuff, because you got to support indie, everybody.
So I am most active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is at Robopulp. And if you go to my profile, on the bottom of the profile, you see a link. You see a Gumroad link where you can access the comic book. And there's a suggested donation, but like I said, I am not demanding, like, pay what you think is fair. But if you like the book, please share the link. On Instagram, I have robo.pulp. And the same thing, there's a link to the comic book there. And I created a TikTok recently where it's Robopulp, but instead of two O's, there's 2 zeros. And I also have a link there. That's a new one. I'm not really sure if I'll even keep it because I don't understand TikTok. It seems like a bizarre thing to me. But it seems to be doing well for some people. So I'll give it a try because it's fairly easy to post. It's not time consuming to post there. So those are the 3 that I have. I have a Facebook page, but I don't really do anything with it. So, and I'm barely there. So Twitter is really the platform where if you want to get in touch with me, say hi. That's where you can find me, Robopulp. That's my most popular one. That's where I live almost there on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep saying it. You got to support indie. And what that means is you got to buy people when they have indie projects. You got to donate to their indie projects. Obviously, Melvin's got a project. You could pay what you think is fair, but you should give $1 at least, if not more. But again, everybody's in tough situations. So I get it. If you can, okay, I want to read the book. I get it. But you really should support because it does go a long way. Even if you can't afford to give money because, well, you're scared about what's going on. One of the things that I recommend is that you do share the link out there. You share it to a friend. You put it in all these Facebook groups. You put it on your wall. You tweet about it. All that stuff matters because it does help let more people know about this book, and that's very important. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So those are really 2 things as far as I'm concerned about me. Obviously, all my social media is down below. I'm Pop Anime Comics on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I do have an email list. You could sign up on Facebook. I rarely shoot out messages. It's just time. That's all it is. I'm somewhat lazy. There you go. But I do have some other stuff coming out. Obviously, BCW supplies, 10% off. Use code Pop Anime Comics. Save yourself some money on bags and boards. Also, I do have this Gundam t-shirt out there. So go buy that. 16 colors in a mini skirt as well. So go support that. I'll be very happy if somebody wants to put that picture on a mini skirt. I think it'll be hilariously funny. You can pick any color you want. Any color you want on it. I'm totally cool with it. I just think it's cool. And then obviously I got something coming out on October 5th of this year. It's a big deal, and I'm very, very excited for it. And more information will be known about it. You will see me doing a bunch of rounds as we get closer to it on a lot of different shows, on a lot of different components. If you want to know more about it, you could DM me and hit me up. More than happy to give you some privy information on it. October 5th, though, it's going to be a fun day and something that everybody needs. So on that note, that's all I got. Also, you could buy me a coffee if you want to support this show. It means a lot to me. It goes a long way. I greatly appreciate it. And on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Andrew. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody. That's all I got too. So, good night, everybody. Thanks for
long
sticking
night.
around. Thanks for people commenting, and that's a wrap.
Yes. Bye.